see a section of 4 riders from the Australian Light Horse Association, dressed in one of the earliest Lancer uniforms, each one proudly holding a lance with red and white pennant flying. They have come from distant parts of New South Wales to be with us today, so as they do come and pass you by, please give them a really warm Sydney wave and welcome of recognition for the very first of the Lancers in the parade today.
Front!
We now jump into our time machine, and the year is 1899. A half squadron of Lancers, under the command of Captain Charles Cox, a member of the regiment's Parramatta troop, has become the first military unit from a British colony to travel to England at their own expense to train for 6 months with the British Army. Shortly before they were due to return to Australia, the Boer War broke out in South Africa. In a fit of patriotic fervour, Fighting Charlie Cox, as he became known, volunteered his entire command to fight for the British in South Africa. In what were the earliest days of the Boer War, the British were in desperate need of cavalry, so a half squadron of Australian Lancers would have seemed to be the answer to a maiden's peril. Trouble was, Fighting Charlie and his Lancers had no horses, a distinct disadvantage for cavalry, and almost no equipment. In a terrific example of Australian make the best of what you've got and get on with the job, the Lancers caught as many wild Cape ponies as they could, within days broke them in, scrounged 29 sets of equipment, and sent the famous Fighting 29 to become what were the first Australians ever to see serious military action. Mounted on ponies, instead of their usual 17 hands high Australian whalers, 6'4" Sergeant Major Robson wrote home that whenever he galloped into action, he had to wrap his legs under the belly of his pony to stop them dragging on the ground. As you look up Macquarie Street, you will see a lone rider wearing, this time, a Boer War uniform and representing the famous Fighting 29. A couple of nights before the Lancers had left London, they were guests of honour at the Alhambra Music Hall. Highlight of the programme was a singer dressed in the uniform of the Lancers, who sang the famous old British song, Soldiers of the Queen. As our Boer War Lancer rides down Macquarie Street, our band, with soloist musician Elizabeth Smith, will bring back memories of the Alhambra by playing Soldiers of the Queen.
Some have learned the reason why. We're not forgetting it, we're not letting it fade away and gradually die. Fade away and gradually die.
Sorry.
So when we say that England's master, remember who has made her so. It's the soldiers of the Queen, my lads, who've been, my lads, who've seen, my lads, in the fight for England's glory, lads, of its worldwide glory, let us sing. And when we say we've always won, and when they ask us how it's done, we'll proudly point to
gentlemen, please give a huge round of applause for the band and musician Elizabeth Smith. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move forward again in time, and the date is August 1914. Australia has been federated for 13 years. An army reorganisation has seen the phrase Light Horse introduced to standardise the title for all mounted regiments. August 1914, of course, is a truly momentous month in world history. The outbreak of World War I. The so-called war to end all wars. Well, I'll leave you all to ponder that one. Under the Australian Constitution, militia units like the Lancers, which then made up the bulk of Australia's army, could not fight outside of Australia. That was the reason for the formation of the 1st Australian Imperial Force, or AIF, an army of volunteers specifically formed to fight outside of Australia. Many of the first recruits came from the ranks of militia units. Many of the members of the New South Wales Lancers joined the 1st Light Horse. These men fought in the trenches of Gallipoli, leaving their horses in Egypt, as Gallipoli was no place for a horse. Later, reunited with their horses, they fought in the defence of the Suez Canal, and as part of Chauvel's ANZAC Mounted Division, they were involved in the action that led to the famous Beersheba Charge and continuous actions throughout Palestine. By the end of the war, 224 had died and 679 wounded in action. The Lancers and their horses had been inseparable for over 50 years. However, changes in warfare and advances in military technology eventually made the battlefield no place for a horse. It was an emotional moment in 1936 when logic prevailed, the regiment was dehorsed and became one of the very first motorised machine gun regiments. The Lancers were now armed with the famous Vickers machine gun, which first saw the light of day in World War I and was still a mainstay of Australian and British armies in World War II. Each Vickers machine gun section was mounted in a 30 hundredweight truck. However, just as in the days when the regiment was mounted on horseback, if you joined the Lancers, you provided your own horse. In the days of being a motorised machine gun regiment, if you joined the Lancers, someone other than the government had to provide the truck. Volunteers were truly volunteers in those days. Initially, the government didn't even provide the money to spray the vehicles a uniform green. So, much to the embarrassment of the regiment, on parades, the first Vickers machine gun section might drive past in Bill Brown's red butcher's truck, the next in Hastings Deering's brown delivery truck, and so on. Glance up Macquarie Street and you'll be transported back to the 1930s as you see our lorry-mounted Vickers machine gun section, complete. Give the cadets of 203 Australian Cadet Unit a rousing cheer as they pass by, dressed in Lancer uniforms of the 1930s. September 1939 conclusively proved that World War I was not the war to end all wars. World War II broke out. Australia formed the 2nd AIF, and as members of a militia machine gun regiment, many Lancers volunteered and joined the 2nd Machine Gun Battalion. They were sent to the Western Desert, where they fought against the Germans and Italians at El Alamein, one of the turning points in World War II, before returning home to fight in New Guinea and Borneo, at times finding themselves fighting alongside their old militia mates in the Lancers. So, how could this be? As World War II progressed, Japan entered the war and commenced its rapid advance to the south to seriously threaten Australia. With the AIF away in the Western Desert and Australia almost devoid of tanks, the Australian Army quickly started to form and train armoured regiments. The Lancers were one of those militia regiments chosen to convert to tanks, and eventually assessed as capable of being designated an AIF unit to join the fight beyond Australia's shores. Problem was, to begin with, there were almost no tanks on which to train. Undaunted, the regiment temporarily equipped with a small track vehicle called the Bren gun carrier, manufactured in thousands during the war. A tank it was not, but the Bren gun carrier was very adequate to help the Lancer crews train in the tactical use and movement of track vehicles across country. Coming along Macquarie Street right now is the museum's World War II Bren gun carrier, affectionately named Brenda. The Bren gun carrier, being a track vehicle, has a certain uniqueness about it. The Australian variation is actually driven with a steering wheel. Now, I personally, in all my years, have never come across another track vehicle steered with a steering wheel. But I'll just leave you to imagine the effect that it has on the drive and the transmission of the little vehicle. But that is just one of the quirks of the Bren gun carrier. By October 1942, the Lancers had been equipped with the British Matilda infantry tank, at 25 tons, relatively heavy for its day, with thick armour but a small 2-pounder gun. It started the war as a very effective tank, but soon became obsolete for use in Europe. Worse, it had no amphibious capability and was universally considered too heavy to be used in jungle. Precisely the type of warfare Australia was destined to fight. Undeterred, the Australian Armoured Corps Centre quickly developed the Matilda's amphibious capability, and the Lancers, with vital Royal Australian Engineers support, helped pioneer the tactical use of these tanks in New Guinea and Borneo. So successful were all these efforts that by the end of the war, the Matilda was considered the best jungle fighting tank in the world. In July 1945, the Lancers mounted what is to this day Australia's largest ever armoured assault at a place called Balikpapan in Borneo. In 1997, museum volunteers discovered, purely by chance, one of only 3 Matildas that had fought at Balikpapan left in the world today. This tank had been abandoned in a paddock near Moss Vale for almost 50 years. When discovered, small trees had grown around it, and the hull was full of accumulated vegetation which had fallen into it over the decades, nicely topped off with a layer of stagnant water. It proved to have been the first tank off the landing craft at Balikpapan, and its wartime crew had named it Ace. The museum has spent tens of thousands of dollars and hundreds of thousands of volunteer working hours to transform a rusting wreck into a fully restored and mobile tank. Well, almost. Unfortunately, we lost the race against time to have Ace ready to take part in today's parade. In the not-too-distant future, it will become the only fully restored and mobile Balikpapan Matilda tank in the world. Approaching you right now is Ace's replacement in the parade, the museum's second Matilda on the back of a low loader because it now has no engines. Now, by 1956, the old Matilda tanks had gone to the Great Ordnance Park in the sky, and the regiment was re-equipped with the Centurion main battle tank. As part of this re-equipment, the Lancers were also issued with the Ferret scout car for its reconnaissance troops. The Ferret is a small, fast, lightly armoured vehicle with impressive cross-country ability, despite being wheeled and not tracked. Its transmission was designed so that it could move as fast backwards as forwards, meaning that it is able to go backwards at 70 kilometres an hour. However, the Ferret driver can only see forwards and relies on the crew commander, who just happens to be looking backwards when the vehicle is reversing, for directions given over the radio. And I would not recommend any of you try it. The Ferret was never designed to stand and fight, but to move well ahead of the tank squadrons, locate the enemy, radio their positions back to the tanks, and then get out of it, quickly. To help with this, Each ferret was fitted with 6 smoke grenade discharges, 3 on either side of the vehicle. See if you can spot them on the museum's ferret, which is driving along Macquarie Street right now. We now come to one of the stars of the parade, and it really is a big bopper. Touchingly named the Beast. Rolling down Macquarie Street right now is the museum's 50-ton Centurion main battle tank. You can travel the length and breadth of Australia today and rarely, if ever, see such an armoured monster driving down the main street of any town or city. Thank you, Lord Mayor, for your confidence in us, and I promise we're being very careful with your roads. The Centurion has a 4-man crew and is armed with a 20-pounder or 84mm gun, fully stabilised to give superior accuracy when the gun is fired while the tank is moving. It also has a coaxially mounted .30-inch Browning machine gun and a .50-inch Browning machine gun on the commander's cupola. In my opinion, a serious heavy machine gun. It has 2 engines, a small auxiliary generator for ancillary purposes, although the real power comes from the 650 horsepower Rolls-Royce Meteor engine. The Beast fired the very last round of 20-pounder ammunition left in Australia at a firepower demonstration just up the road from here at the Holsworthy range. You will see the Beast come to a halt in front of the reviewing dais, traverse its turret right, and dip its gun in salute and to show respect for the Governor-General, but also for our assembled World War II veterans. Please, as it rolls up to the reviewing dais and presents its salute, please give a rousing cheer in recognition. Just as in 1936, it came time for the Lancers to say farewell to their horses, by 1971, they had said farewell to tanks and entered the regiment's era as a reconnaissance unit. For many years, it was equipped with the M113 family of American armoured personnel carriers, variously modified. We had hoped to have one in time for the parade, but right now they're very difficult to come by and is not arrived in time. However, at the last minute, we've been able to include a surprise replacement. For a number of years, when the regiment was equipped with the M113s, it was also equipped with gun buggies, a 106 recoilless rifle loaded in the rear of a lightweight stripped-down Land Rover that we call our E-type Land Rover. The recoilless rifle is an anti-tank weapon, recoilless to remove the risk that when it is fired from the back of the Rover, the little vehicle is not propelled backwards almost as far as the ammunition travels forwards. However, it has an enormous backblast, which could set the bush alight if the crew was not careful, and would shower them with small rocks and stones if the ground was of that type. I'd like to thank our local state member, Dr. Jeff Lee, and the Army History Unit for their help in having our gun buggy ready for today. As we entered the 21st century, the regiment was re-equipped yet again, as its role changed to that of a light cavalry reconnaissance. A light cavalry scout troop consisted of a troop leader and 26 lancers, mounted in 4 patrol vehicles and 2 6-wheeled mobility vehicles. Each patrol vehicle carried a driver, commander, and a gunner. Each mobility vehicle, a driver, commander, gunner, with 4 or 5 dismounted soldiers in the back. Each soldier was armed with a Steyr 5.56mm rifle with a range to 600 metres. Support weapons included a 5.56mm Mini-Mi machine gun and a 7.62mm Mag 58 machine gun with a range out to 1,000 metres. It was during this time that the regiment sent 2 rotations of Lancers to support the regular army in the peacekeeping mission in the Solomon Islands. Volunteers yet again volunteering for a period of full-time service overseas. The vehicle about to pass you now is a patrol vehicle, crewed by the first of our current serving Lancers. So please give them the warmest of warm welcomes to the modern regiment. We have almost completed our journey from the colony of New South Wales back in 1885 and from Lancers mounted on horseback. Late last year, the regiment commenced its latest re-equipment with the introduction of the Bushmaster protected mobility vehicle. Specially designed and built here in Australia, the Bushmaster has proven itself in active service in recent years to be the best vehicle in the world to protect soldiers from the modern scourge of the improvised explosive device, commonly known as IEDs. The Bushmaster has a top speed of 100 kilometres per hour and an operational range of 800 kilometres, virtually from here to the Queensland border. It is built to carry and sustain a 9-man infantry section, fully air-conditioned, and can store up to 250 litres of drinking water and a 3-day supply of food. As I'm sure you've now grown to expect, looking up Macquarie Street, you will see the final vehicles in our street parade. 2 Bushmasters, crewed again by members of the current regiment, and therefore bringing our story up to the moment, 30th of August, 2014. The Bushmaster might have been the last vehicle in our parade, but the parade couldn't possibly be complete without the full regiment, the 1st 15th Royal New South Wales Lancers. We hope that, amongst many other things, we have shown that, in many ways, the spirit of ANZAC lives on today, is as relevant today as it was when it was forged in 1915, and still defines much of what it is to be Australian.